Near the city gate leading to the dark cave of Klassen, a terrifying scream echoed, prompting panic among the people. They fled in fear upon spotting a demon beast. Among the chaos, Yi Qing stood firm, his breath heavy and blood dripping from his face and hands. Despite being only a level 0 abyssal scavenger, armed with nothing but a wooden shield and a stick, he refused to back down. Society viewed level 0 individuals like him as burdens, surviving on scraps, yet Yi Qing's resolve remained unshaken. Facing the demon wolf, Yi Qing realized his attacks had inflicted no damage. The creature's sheer power loomed over him, yet he stood defiantly, analyzing its every move. The wolf prepared to pounce, its jaws wide open, but Yi Qing held his ground. He knew the world deemed people like him worthless, but his determination to fight back burned brighter. With a fierce cry, Yi Qing charged forward, shielding himself and swinging his stick with all his might. The makeshift weapon shattered, splinters scattering as the wolf countered, sinking its teeth into his shoulder. Gritting his teeth, Yi Qing stifled a scream of pain, refusing to succumb to despair as he stood frozen against the overwhelming foe. In G City, near an A-rank C abyssal gate, an armed man stood watch, eyes fixed on the glowing portal. Suddenly, a bright light revealed Yi Qing sprinting out, clutching a box. As the senior garbage collector of the abyss, he ran, evading the monster chasing him. Moments later, his superior shouted insults, calling him slow, before charging forward and severing several tentacles of the emerging monster, forcing it back into the portal with a scream. Yi Qing dropped to his knees, setting down the box filled with crystals. His work involved collecting and sorting remnants of monster battles, ensuring these valuable resources didn't leak to the public. These were no ordinary items. They were CAGR crystals, each worth 50,000 yen. As Yi Qing wiped a crystal clean with a rag, lost in thought, the man who had fought off the monster approached him. Placing his boot arrogantly on the box, the stranger addressed Yi Qing as a rat. Startled by the unexpected confrontation, Yi Qing froze, his thoughts interrupted. The man frowned and sternly reminded Yi Qing that the reward would be divided equally. He warned that if Yi Qing dared to steal even one crystal, not only would he forfeit his share, but he would also face jail time. Maintaining his composure, Yi Qing returned the crystal to the box, smiling faintly. He reassured the man that, having worked in the abyss for years, he was well aware of the rules. As he continued cleaning the crystals of debris, his attention briefly shifted to the portal. Several more men emerged, clutching identical boxes of crystals, their frantic movements and desperate cries drawing his focus. Observing them, Yi Qing reflected on his job. Abyss scavengers were all level 0 individuals, considered expendable by society. If the battle team failed to subdue the monsters, scavengers' lives were often at risk. It wasn't an exaggeration to call the work dangerous. Shifting his thoughts, Yi Qing calculated his earnings. Returning from the dungeon earned scavengers 300 yen, and they received 1/1000th of the collected garbage's value, roughly 600 yuan. After giving 30% to management, he was left with 540 yuan. Examining another crystal, he sighed quietly, muttering that he was still 670,000 yuan in debt and needed to work harder. Hearing his remark, the passing men paused and turned their attention to him, calling out his name. One of the men informed Yi Qing about a job offering 3,000 yuan. Startled by the amount, Yi Qing stood up in shock, asking if the offer was genuine. The man, without answering directly, asked if Yi Qing truly needed money and invited him to join. Without hesitation, Yi Qing eagerly agreed, shouting his acceptance. Soon, the bus carrying the workers drove toward their destination. One of the men, seated near the front, questioned if they were really heading to Cheon City Shopping Mall, recalling news of a Class A abyss in the area. Another worker remarked that this explained the high reward and mentioned hearing that previous teams sent there had never returned. Nearby, a man questioned whether another squad would actually be sent, while his comrade assumed so, adding grimly that they'd also have to recover the equipment of those who had failed to return. Displeased, one worker criticized the capitalists, accusing them of treating people like expendable pigs and questioning who had allowed the monetization of the abyss in the first place. Meanwhile, Yiqing sat silently at a distance, resting his chin on his hand. He gazed thoughtfully out of the window, watching the passing scenery while contemplating his business prospects. It had been 10 years since the gate of the abyss rose from the underworld, bringing a radiant portal to the streets of a city. Its energy devastated nearby buildings. After the rise of the abyss, humanity faced terrifying creatures, massive monsters with jaws lined with sharp fangs. Only a special class of individuals, armed with shields, bows, swords, and axes, could stand against these beasts. These skilled fighters ventured through the abyss portals, defeating monsters and discovering treasures like magic crystals and mysterious weapons. The first victory against such a creature unveiled these valuable resources, prompting widespread exploration of the abyss across continents. This discovery transformed the global economy. Traditional industries collapsed, and all investments shifted to the burgeoning abyss industry. Reflecting on this, Yiqing recalled the time his job application was rejected. His prospective employer, brushing his application aside, apologized, explaining they couldn't hire someone with a 0 level. Sometime later, Yiqing stood in a hospital corridor, helplessly listening to an irate doctor. The man berated him, insisting the hospital wasn't a charity and demanding that Yiqing take his sister away if he couldn't pay for her treatment. Desperate, Yiqing clasped his hands together and begged for forgiveness, pleading with the doctor to allow his sister to stay for just a few more days. Later, when Yiqing returned home, loud banging on his door interrupted him. A man shouted, calling him a rat and demanding he open up, reminding him that his rent had been overdue for 2 months. Yiqing stayed silent, tightening his lips before opening the door with a sorrowful expression. The landlord barked at him to leave if he couldn't pay, throwing his documents aside. Wherever Yiqing sought work, rejection greeted him. Organizations expressed frustration, yelled at him for wasting their time, and mockingly laughed, dismissing him outright. People like him, level 0 individuals, were deemed useless and unworthy of consideration. One rainy day, Yiqing sat alone on a bench, head bowed, soaked by the downpour. Scattered papers lay around him, remnants of his futile job search. He thought grimly about how employment prospects for level 0 people were non-existent, leaving them doomed from the start. Lost in despair, Yiqing was startled when a man approached, handing him a flyer for a mini-loan. The flyer promised instant money. The man, noticing Yiqing's disheartened state, asked if he needed cash. Raising his tear-streaked face, Yiqing stared at the man, who then added that the loan required one condition, leaving his organs as collateral. Without resistance, Yiqing silently took the flyer. Returning to reality, Yiqing sighed and closed his eyes. Suddenly, one of the men turned to him, mentioning that he had heard Yiqing had borrowed 1 million and lost it all in the stock market. If he didn't pay it back, he'd lose a kidney. The remark made Yiqing shudder, his eyes widening. Another worker added that Yiqing was also paying for his sister's medical bills, and he assumed everyone knew how high the current treatment costs were. Yiqing, not engaging in the conversation, pressed his lips tighter, lowering the brim of his cap to cover his eyes. His colleagues continued, speculating that Yiqing would likely die before he could repay the debt, meaning he'd be stuck as a garbage man for the rest of his life. After some time, the bus finally reached their destination. When it stopped, one of the magicians from the team, clearly displeased, remarked that they had arrived too late. The workers apologized and quickly got off the bus, heading toward the team, ready to continue the mission. The other guy named Lao Chen ordered the group to keep up, warning them that if any garbage workers died, it wouldn't be the team's responsibility. As they approached the portal, the team urged the garbage workers forward, and they began to climb the rocks toward the abyss portal without hesitation. Yiqing, who had also gotten off the bus, looked at the abyss portal seriously, a deep frown on his face. He was determined that this time, he would earn enough money and survive. With that thought, he tightened his grip on the straps of his backpack and walked forward, entering the underground city of the Chiffon City Shopping Center. This was a B-class abyss, and Yiqing noted that it was his first time entering such a dangerous zone. Once inside, the team gathered, but suddenly, a girl with special abilities frowned, sensing something. She turned sharply, and the rest of the team, with mouths agape, saw monsters charging toward them. The leader cursed and called out to Lao Chen, who stepped forward confidently, declaring that they were dealing with a small group of spirit wolves. With a focused expression, Lao Chen stretched out both hands, gathering fire energy above his palms. As several monsters leaped at him, he launched a powerful volley of flames, a wide smile spreading across his face as his attack collided with the creatures. The magical energy exploded, and the spirit wolves that weren't destroyed quickly scattered, fleeing to the sides. The team captain, holding his shield and sword, warned everyone to stay alert, as demons could attack from anywhere. One of the team members asked where they were headed, and the captain pointed his sword upward, saying they needed to reach the 5th floor. Suddenly, the girl in the group, changing the subject, admitted she wasn't sure, suggesting it might just be her imagination, but it felt like the 1st floor had become 5 times wider and 3 times higher. Adjusting his glasses with a bit of arrogance, another teammate explained that this was how the abyss worked. On the outside, it seemed normal, but its structure shifted on the inside. He also wondered about the whereabouts of the previous group's remains, specifically the bodies. Turning toward the scavengers, he pointed at them, ordering them to find the bodies as they weren't here just for a walk. No one responded, and soon everyone continued moving forward. The only one who paused was Lao Chen, who dropped to one knee to tie his shoelaces. He chuckled quietly, muttering to himself that it didn't matter where a level 0 person went, they'd always be in the way. At that moment, Yi Qing, still taking in his surroundings, walked closer but didn't notice Lao Chen, who was bent over. He tripped over him, and realizing what had happened, his jaw clenched, his eyes widening in horror. Lao Chen furrowed his brows in frustration, and when Yi Qing stumbled in front of him, he began to rise, angrily ordering him to watch where he was going. Yi Qing, desperate, apologized for the mishap, but Lao Chen ignored the apology, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him off the ground. Pressing Yi Qing against the wall, he yelled in irritation, admitting that he had thought Yi Qing was a monster. At that moment, the team leader called out, snapping Lao Chen's attention away and reminding him they had a mission to focus on. Lao Chen hesitated for a moment, still holding Yi Qing off the ground, making it difficult for him to breathe. Finally, with a scowl, Lao Chen released Yi Qing, telling him that if he knew he was worthless, he shouldn't have gotten so close. Unable to steady himself, Yi Qing fell to the ground, hitting his head painfully. Squinting his eyes, he struggled to get up, his cap flying off in the process. Mentally calling Shernan an arrogant idiot, he finally managed to sit up. Another guy, observing him, muttered sarcastically that they were a dream team. A little later, Yi Qing, now back on his feet, trailed behind the others as they continued forward. As he adjusted his cap, he thought about how people like him, those at level 0, were always seen as outcasts, burdens, and worthless. However, as he pressed his lips tighter, frowning, he reminded himself that they didn't know he was close to leveling up, having already gained 99 out of the 100 experience points needed. After thinking about his next move, Yi Qing confidently followed the rest of the team. Later, as they entered a narrow corridor, they encountered a demon beast in the distance. The other scavengers immediately panicked and fled, but Yi Qing stood his ground, his eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't understand why the members of the battle group were scared. He noticed that the spirit wolf's health was critically low, and his instincts kicked in. As the demon wolf bared its fangs, Yi Qing began quickly assessing the situation. He squinted, spotting a level 1 wooden shield and a level 1 wooden stick nearby. He knew that the monster was close to being defeated, but at that moment, the wolf lunged at him with its mouth wide open. Pushing aside all doubts, Yi Qing jumped to the side, dodging the attack. With determination, he grabbed the stick and shield, assuming an offensive position. He ran towards the demon wolf, jumping into the air to strike from above. He swung the stick with all his strength, aiming for the wolf's head and shouting for it to die. However, to his horror, the damage dealt was 0. Yi Qing froze, panic rising within him. The demon wolf, clearly enraged by the failed attack, turned its head toward him. It became even angrier, and the few scavengers who had stayed behind, hiding in fear, couldn't believe what they were witnessing. They were astonished that Yi Qing had stayed to fight. Some of them muttered in disbelief, questioning his intelligence. As Yi Qing charged toward the monster, one of the scavengers, still hiding, asked if he really didn't understand that only the combat team could handle monsters like this. Without responding aloud, Yi Qing thought to himself that of course he understood, but he wasn't about to run away. Clenching his jaw in determination, he dashed forward to attack again. His agility, intelligence, constitution, and luck were all at level 1, but he was driven by the need to survive. To increase his mobility, he threw off his backpack and moved quickly to the side. The wolf, enraged, followed him, its jaws snapping. Yi Qing knew that with his weak equipment, he wouldn't be able to break through even the weakest monster's defenses, but he refused to back down. Focusing on his surroundings, he realized that he had an advantage: speed. He ran toward a nearby wall, pushing off the roots that tangled with it, using the momentum to leap. He shouted mentally, understanding the dangerous situation he was in, as the monster lunged for him. In that instant, the wolf's jaws snapped shut where he had been a moment earlier, causing the thick tree trunk to crack. Realizing that he needed to use more force, Yi Qing swung his stick midair as he landed, shouting with all his might. Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, Lao Chen, surrounded by wolf corpses, let out a laugh. He mocked Scavenger's actions, commenting that people with level 0 always ran when they saw a monster. His boss, smirking, noted that while killing a monster might earn them some luck points, it only counted if the monster wasn't a demon beast. Lao Chen, realizing everything might be lost, picked up one of the magic crystals he had received earlier. As he observed it, he knew the team would take the most valuable items for themselves, leaving the scavengers with whatever was left. Calling out to his comrades, he ordered them to tell the scavengers to clean up the area. They began looking through the item cards and crystals they had collected when suddenly, a girl from the team frowned and pointed to the side. She noted that it seemed one monster had survived. They all heard a scream from the scavengers who had decided to flee. One of the team members remarked that everything was going just as the boss had predicted. Stepping aside, Lao Chen pointed at a piece of purple equipment and warned the others that it belonged to him, reminding them not to take it. Meanwhile, Yi Qing continued to fight the wolf, but when he tried to swing his stick again, it shattered into pieces. The monster took advantage of this and sank its fangs into his shoulder. Clenching his jaw to suppress the pain, Yi Qing's eyes widened as blood splattered around him. In that moment, he vowed that he wouldn't die like some weakling. With the remaining piece of his stick, he swung it with all his might, driving the sharp end into the monster's eye. Blood splattered in the air as he dealt a critical blow, inflicting fatal damage on the spirit wolf. The monster let out a scream before collapsing, and Yi Qing, exhausted, fell to the ground. But then he realized the wolf was dead. He stood up, taking in the sight of the creature's body as dust rose around it. Kneeling down, he sighed in relief, sweat dripping down his face. Narrowing his eyes, he chuckled to himself, a small smile breaking through, before raising his hands into fists and screaming triumphantly. A little while later, after calming down, Yi Qing lowered his head, lost in thought. He turned to the side when he heard footsteps approaching. It was Lao Chen, who had come closer with an expression of boredom. With his hands in his pockets, Lao Chen sneered and remarked that it took a single person to defeat a low-level wolf. His eyes lingered on Yi Qing with disdain before he approached him, grabbed him by the collar, and mocked him, asking if he truly thought he was a hero now. Cursing under his breath, Lao Chen assumed Yi Qing was suicidal and reminded him that they weren't there to drag his corpse back. Despite the blood dripping down his face and Lao Chen's angry ranting, Yi Qing smiled faintly, lost in his own thoughts. He thought about the various career paths within the battle group. Once a person reached level 1, they could join and even obtain a special job. The symbols of those jobs flashed in his mind as he mentally noted that to reach that point, he needed to focus on gaining experience points. People at level 0, like him, couldn't defeat demon beasts on their own. It was essentially a death sentence. He recalled the countless expeditions he had participated in, each one slowly increasing his experience, though only by small amounts, like 1% at a time. It was a long and dangerous road, risking his life over and over, finding injured people who were easy to finish off, and waiting day after day for a chance to earn points. But all of that had led him to 99% of the experience required for the next level. After killing the demon beast, he gained the final experience points, and now, as he recalled the moment he dealt the fatal blow, he realized his experience points were at 100%. Yi Qing frowned slightly and muttered aloud that what he had done was the only way to gain experience points. In his opinion, this was the ideal condition, and he couldn't help but smile wider as the system notified him that he had earned 100 experience points out of 100, leveling up. As a light enveloped his body, Lao Chun frowned and called him names, asking if he had really leveled up. The system congratulated Yi Qing on reaching level 1, and he relaxed, standing still for a while as magical energy surrounded him, increasing his stats. Soon, the system notified him that his profession was now a scavenger, with level 1 being the maximum. Yi Qing froze, his eyes widening in shock, and even his mouth dropped open. Lao Chen, noticing Yi Qing's characteristics, pressed his lips tightly to hold back his laughter. However, tears appeared at the corners of his eyes, and he couldn't help but burst out laughing. He mocked Yi Qing, asking what kind of nonsense this was. After all, Yi Qing was still a garbage man even after reaching level 1. Lao Chen mocked the fact that the maximum level for someone like Yi Qing was level 1 and continued to laugh. Seriously, Lao Chen said between laughs, patting Yi Qing on the shoulder, "I'm sorry, I just can't help it. This kind of chance only comes once in a lifetime, and you're still a garbage man." He laughed again, calling Yi Qing's current job the perfect fit for him. Yi Qing pressed his lips tighter, saying nothing, and stood there, enduring Lao Chen's laughter. Finally, Lao Chen calmed down, approached Yi Qing, and ordered him to listen up. He called Yi Qing a level 1 scavenger and reminded him that his comrades had already left, so he would have to clean up the mess by himself. Yi Qing didn't respond, though his dissatisfaction was clear. Lao Chen returned to his comrades, already assuming they wouldn't believe what had just happened. Yi Qing glanced down at his bloody palm, repeating the name of his job, scavenger. Was it really that weak? He frowned, realizing that if level 1 was the maximum for a scavenger, he wouldn't be able to use equipment to increase his level. The thought left him momentarily discouraged, but he quickly shifted his focus. He looked around, wondering what kind of abilities scavengers had. Suddenly, he froze, noticing that the body of the spirit wolf he had killed was surrounded by a faintly shining energy. His eyes widened as the system notified him, "Recyclable garbage detected, spirit wolf's body." It then asked if he wanted to send the wolf's body for recycling. Yi Qing stared at the notification in shock, his mouth slightly open. After a brief pause, he exclaimed, "It needs to be sent for recycling." At that moment, a large mass of magical energy appeared behind him. From it, a multitude of hands shot out, each finger ending in sharp claws. Yi Qing's eyes widened in horror as the hands stretched toward the wolf's body. With a scream, he carefully observed them, watching as they grabbed the corpse and began pulling it into the dark energy space. Still in shock but slightly calmer, Yi Qing muttered to himself, "Is this really the ability of a garbage man?" The wolf's body disappeared into the energy space, and Yi Qing felt an eerie sensation. It was as though the wolf had been sucked into an endless hole, leaving him with an unsettling feeling. Finally, the refining process began, and the system notified him that it was completed. After a brief moment, 2 hands extended from the dark energy space, handing him several clumps of magical energy as well as an ability card. Yi Qing's eyes narrowed in curiosity as he took the items, now fully realizing that his profession as a scavenger wasn't quite as useless as he had first thought. Yi Qing stared at the ability card in his hands, surprised that he had obtained Phantom Dash and 3 equipment points. Can you really get equipment cards from corpses? He wondered aloud. Curious, he ordered the system to open the system summary to check his stats. When he saw his stats, he frowned, realizing that he needed 3 agility points to use the card. Determined, he decided to convert his equipment points into agility points, raising his agility to the required amount. With the conditions met, the system prompted him again, confirming that he had the necessary stats to use the Phantom Dash skill. The skill card, surrounded by faintly glowing magical energy, beckoned him. Yi Qing focused on it and, without hesitation, declared that he wanted to use it. As soon as he activated the card, magical energy surged into his body. Yi Qing closed his eyes, absorbing the energy. A moment later, he opened his eyes, feeling the change, but when he looked at himself, he couldn't detect any immediate difference. "Is this all?" he muttered, confused and a bit disappointed that there was no visible sign of the skill's effect. Just as he was pondering this, he heard a voice rudely shouting for him to come closer. Annoyed, Yi Qing shouted back that he was already coming and kicked off the ground to run forward. But his kick was so powerful that the ground beneath him cracked. "What the?" he exclaimed in shock, as he sped forward faster than he intended, misjudging the force of his dash. He tripped on a route on the floor and was sent flying, crashing a short distance ahead. Shaking his head in disbelief, he asked aloud, "Was there really such a skill?" The system's voice chimed in, announcing that the Phantom Dash skill was recharging. Yi Qing sighed. "Of course it has cooldown." Standing up, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then opened them again. Before him lay a heap of wolf corpses, all considered recyclable material. As he surveyed the scene, he wondered if it was true that not only equipment but also abilities could be gained from this. It dawned on him that he was using the max-level Abyssal Scavenger skill. Excited, he activated the ability and began absorbing the corpses. With each processed corpse, he gained points, 4, then 3 and so on, until the points dwindled. He continued to stand there, waiting for all the corpses to be recycled. Finally, the system informed him that he had gained just one more point. Puzzled, he realized that when he first processed a spirit wolf corpse, he had gained the Ghost Dash ability. Since then, no new abilities had appeared, and the points seemed to decrease each time. He speculated that perhaps another monster was needed to unlock further abilities. Curious, he pointed to a nearby spot, asking if there were more valuable resources to be found. The system confirmed this with a point gain. Looking at his stats, he noted that he had accumulated 111 points and wondered which skills to prioritize. His eyes widened as he realized, somewhat frustrated, that he didn't know when he would be able to gather more points. Smirking, he decided to evenly distribute all his points. The system repeatedly informed Yi Qing that his strength, agility, luck, willpower, and constitution had all increased, each reaching level 20. Meanwhile, the battle team was finishing off other monsters. After defeating the last few, the boss turned to Lao Chen and asked if he was really talking about Yi Qing switching jobs to a garbage man. Lao Chen admitted he hadn't even known such a thing was possible. The team's mage cleared his throat and explained that 3 hidden jobs were introduced each year, but the top-ranking jobs rarely changed, and most hidden jobs were just for fun. Lao Chen frowned, realizing that with Yi Qing's maximum level being only 1, he was barely stronger than someone with level 0, meaning, in the grand scheme, nothing had really changed. Deciding to ignore Yi Qing for now, the team boss motioned for the others to keep moving. He readied his shield and sword, reminding everyone to stay alert. The team continued their march, but after a while, they stopped near some twisted branches protruding from the ground. Their eyes widened in shock as one of the branches stretched out, forming a cross, with a man hanging from it, roots protruding from his mouth. Seeing the eerie sight, the commander announced that the mission target had been located and the remains of the falcon hunting team's captain had been found. The girl, holding daggers in her hands, questioned how such a large body could fit inside the shopping mall, especially on the 5th floor. The magician, examining the body, noted that even though less than 48 hours had passed since the abyss transformation, the corpses looked like they were from 10 years ago. He suspected magic was involved. The girl, observing that they had only encountered weak demon beasts, expressed confusion over how the Falcon team, classified as B+, could have failed. At that moment, the leader turned sharply, his eyes widening in shock as he noticed a large number of zombies emerging from the ground nearby, heading straight for them. One of the monsters grabbed his leg, and he exclaimed that there were more than just demons here. Suddenly he remembered a breaking news broadcast, reporting on the abyss transformation in the Chiffon City shopping mall, now at danger level B, with 27 people declared missing. The leader frowned and ordered his team to prepare for an ambush, realizing they were surrounded. He fought back, pushing the zombies away from him, and his team readied their weapons. Shernan, casting fireballs to the sides, wondered where the corpses had gone earlier, only to realize they were all now around them. The commander, using his shield to push back a zombie, came to the realization that the low-level demon beasts had only been there to lead them into this trap. Suddenly, the branches of a tree behind the team shifted, tearing up the ground nearby. With a startled exclamation, the team members ran to the side, and the boss, frowning, realized this was the final monster of the area, a classic carnivorous plant. The roots twisted into the shape of a monster with powerful clawed paws. As the team members focused on this new threat, they became distracted from the zombies. Just then, Lao Chen, sweating from fear, urged his comrades to look up, announcing that the entire falcon hunting party had turned into zombies and were now charging toward them. Meanwhile, Yiqing was using his talent to recycle corpses, collecting additional magic crystals as rewards. Soon, the system notified him that he had received an achievement for recycling 50 corpses. Delighted, he celebrated the achievement, anticipating a reward. The system presented him with an ordinary heart-shaped necklace and a regular dagger. Yiqing, displeased, remarked that even a scavenger's reward should be something useful, finding the items rather ironic. However, he was suddenly distracted by a terrifying roar. Turning around in shock, he saw an enraged zombie charging toward him. Fearful, he watched as the zombie swung at him. Just as the attack came, he used his agility skill, excellent dodge, to leap to the side. Despite nearly losing his balance, he managed to push off the floor with his hands, performing a somersault midair, and landed gracefully on his feet. Yiqing sighed, exclaiming that the monster had scared him, thinking he was finished. However, as he checked his body, he noticed an increase in his agility and wondered if it was due to leveling up his agility stat. Smirking, he assumed that was the case, but his thoughts were interrupted when the zombie, preparing for another attack, charged at him. The monster's modified clawed hand was about to strike his face, but Yiqing's eyes widened, and he jumped to the side. The zombie's hand slammed into the wall, leaving Yiqing frowning. He realized the monster had become not just more agile, but also stronger. Activating Phantom Dash, Yiqing pushed off the ground, thinking it was his turn to strike. He clenched his fist and swung, confident that this time his attack would deal more damage. His punch hit the zombie with such force that the creature was sent crashing into the wall, breaking its defense due to the strength skill's activation. Part of the zombie's body splattered with blood as it froze, trembled, and screamed. Yiqing smiled smugly, passing his hand over his chin, and declared that this version of him was incomparable. The system notified him that his intelligence skill had helped him find the enemy's weaknesses. Looking at the still-living zombie, Yiqing realized its level was high, and its weaknesses were fire, with its neck being a critical weak point. After recovering from the blow, the zombie began to scream again. As the zombie gathered its strength and charged toward Yiqing, he swiftly ran toward the monster, dodging its attacks. When the zombie swung at him, he dropped to the ground to avoid the blow. As the zombie flew to the side, Yiqing found himself behind it, taking advantage of the opportunity. He recalled that the neck was the weak point and took out a dagger item card. Activating the luck skill, the dagger was empowered, and Yiqing slashed the blade across the zombie's neck, causing it to bleed. After the strike, Yiqing jumped to the side, and the monster, with its roots severed, fell to the ground. The system announced that Yiqing had killed the zombie. Suddenly, a faint light began to glow from the thick liquid left on his hand from the blow. The system activated a constitution skill called Plant Poison Resistance. The liquid dripped off his hand as Yiqing smiled, feeling a rush of happiness. This was the first time he had killed something. The system then notified him that it had found recyclable trash in the form of the zombie body and asked if it should be sent for recycling. Yiqing agreed, and soon the body was processed. During the recycling process, he gained a new skill called Toxic Transformation, which converted the effects of poisoning into beneficial effects. Surprised by the skill card, Yiqing wondered if his new ability meant he could drink poison like water. Deciding to test it, he used the card, adding its Toxic Transformation skill to his abilities and earning 5 additional points. While checking his updated stats, he noticed he had also received a bottle labeled as Spoiled Poison. The item description warned it was highly toxic, But Yi Qing, curious about his new skill, exclaimed that poison resistance would convert toxicity into beneficial effects. Opening the bottle, he poured the poison into his mouth. As expected, the toxic substance transformed into a healing effect. A magical healing aura surrounded him, mending his wounds completely within seconds. Delighted by the outcome, Yi Qing cheered, amazed at the power of this skill. The effect lasted 10 minutes, leaving him energized and renewed. He noted that intelligence improvements allowed him to identify more weaknesses in enemies and decided to allocate his newly earned points to this attribute. After distributing the points, his strength, agility, willpower, constitution, and luck all stood at 40, while intelligence reached 50. However, his focus on the system interface was interrupted by a sudden scream behind him. Turning around, Yi Qing pressed his lips tightly, asking if he had missed another monster. His eyes widened in horror as he spotted a horde of zombies advancing toward him. Shocked by their sheer numbers, he froze for a moment. Then, recalling the harsh words people had once used to describe him, a burden, worthless, and absolutely useless, he clenched his fists in frustration, determined to prove them wrong. As the zombies charged, Yi Qing prepared his sword, determined to prove his worth. Mentally shouting his name, he declared himself a scavenger and activated his ability, taunting the zombies by calling them trash. With a frown, he thrust his weapon forward, ready to take them on. Meanwhile, the battle team members continued their desperate fight against the zombies, still shaken by the realization that the Falcon team had been turned into monsters. The undead shrieked and attacked relentlessly. The team leader clenched his jaw as a zombie wielding an axe struck his shield. The blow left visible cracks, making him curse under his breath. He noted with growing dread how powerful these reanimated corpses were, especially with the carnivorous plant lurking menacingly behind them. As they struggled against the Falcon team-turned zombies, other undead stood ominously in the background, waiting for their chance to strike. Realizing the odds were against them, the commander shouted a retreat. The team members yelled in agreement, running to escape the onslaught. Lao Chen unleashed fireballs to clear a path, scattering some zombies and creating an opening. Amid the chaos, a scream pierced the air. A girl from the team was caught by a zombie that had closed in from behind. The monster's dagger plunged into her back, causing blood to gush from her mouth. The commander turned in horror but couldn't save her in time. Moments later, the team's mage was ensnared by the carnivorous plant. Its roots pierced through his body, ending his life in an instant. The survivor's retreat turned frantic as despair began to creep in. Before the mage succumbed to the carnivorous plant, his desperate scream echoed through the battlefield. The team commander, overwhelmed by the dire situation, cursed under his breath. Monsters closed in from all sides, and Lao Chen, gripped by fear, noted how incredibly strong the enemies were. Determined to survive, he kept running forward, ignoring the chaos behind him. At one point, the commander made a bold move, halting abruptly and turning to strike with his shield in an effort to delay the pursuing monsters. Lao Chen, glancing back, clenched his jaw, consumed by his own thoughts. He hadn't joined this mission to die. He came for money and equipment. Dying here would be a waste. With that, he made a selfish decision. He cast a spell immobilizing the commander, who suddenly froze in place. Turning his furious gaze to Lao Chen, the commander cursed and demanded to know why he was doing this. He reminded Lao Chen that they were part of the same team. But Lao Chen, devoid of guilt, apologized and explained that the captain would have to hold off the zombies for him to escape. Adding insult to injury, he promised to pay for the commander's funeral. As the immobilized commander was overwhelmed by the advancing monsters, his bloody hand trembled as he reached out, cursing Lao Chen with his final breath. Lao Chen, smirking to himself, rationalized his betrayal. He had already collected a few items and planned to concoct a believable story about why the team perished. His survival was all that mattered. However, as he fled, Yi Qing suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking his path. Caught off guard, Lao Chen stumbled and fell to the ground. When he looked up, Yi Qing stood there, glaring down at him menacingly. Panicked, Lao Chen instinctively covered his mouth with his hand to stifle a scream. The cold, unforgiving expression on Yi Qing's face left no room for excuses. Lao Chen frowned at Yi Qing and, with disdain, referred to him as a garbage man yet again. Yi Qing, unfazed, glared at him with contempt and questioned whether he had truly betrayed his captain just to escape. Lao Chen avoided answering, his attention shifting to the dark energy surrounding Yi Qing as it recycled the corpses of destroyed zombies. His mouth slightly agape, he stood up in disbelief, horrified by what he was witnessing. "Did you really do this?" Lao Chen asked, pointing at the disintegrating corpses. For a moment, he froze, but then his expression darkened. He realized that Yi Qing couldn't be left alive, not after witnessing his betrayal. Smirking, Lao Chen asked if Yi Qing truly wanted to become stronger, then muttered that now was the perfect time to end this. Without hesitation, he swung his leg, aiming a powerful kick at Yi Qing's chest. However, Lao Chen's attack backfired spectacularly. Yi Qing's skill activated, blocking the physical force and redirecting it back at the attacker. Lao Chen was knocked off balance and fell to the ground, clutching his leg. He cursed loudly, calling Yi Qing names, but Yi Qing only frowned. With a cold voice, he remarked that being a traitor was even worse than being a loser. Activating his ability, Yi Qing summoned numerous dark hands from the energy space. They surged forward, grabbing Lao Chen with an unrelenting grip. He screamed, struggling against the ghostly hands as they began to drag him into the abyss of dark energy. Lao Chen flailed wildly, reaching out in desperation, but there was nothing nearby to grasp. He cursed and resisted with all his strength, refusing to accept his fate. "Mother!" he cried out, his voice trembling with fear and hopelessness. Despite his desperate pleas, the hands lifted him into the air, immersing him deeper into the void. The recycling process had begun, and there was no escape for Lao Chen. The system interrupted abruptly, announcing that Lao Chen could not be recycled. Additional phantom hands materialized, crossing themselves in a gesture that confirmed the system's verdict. With a burst of dark energy, Lao Chen was ejected unceremoniously onto the ground. Yi Qing, crouching next to him, sneered with contempt and remarked that sometimes, getting rid of the insignificant was necessary. At that moment, the system chimed in again, notifying Yi Qing that his trash recycling skill had been upgraded. The update allowed for recycling the abilities of trash if their consent was obtained. Alongside this announcement, Yi Qing received a spell card labeled Master's 3-minute experience card. With a slight frown, Yi Qing studied the card's details and quipped sarcastically, wondering if silence equated to consent. Finding it rather convenient, he activated the card and closed his eyes, letting the new skill transfer into his body. A surge of information flowed into his mind, revealing that he had acquired the skill Flame Field Control. This spell required 15 intelligence points to cast, which was no issue for Yi Qing with his 50 intelligence points. The system further clarified that by using the cloud effect, the fireball skill could evolve into a massive explosion. Yi Qing's musings were interrupted as the remaining zombies, having finished with the team captain's body, began advancing toward him. The monsters screamed as they approached, their menacing forms growing closer. Yi Qing quickly shifted into a fighting stance, stretching out his palm as he pondered how Lao Chen had activated the fireball spell. Mimicking the process, fiery energy started forming near his hand. With a sudden burst of power, a massive fireball shot forward, engulfing the advancing zombies in a wave of flames. When the fire finally dissipated, Yi Qing froze in shock. All that remained of the monsters was a pile of ash. Realizing he had unintentionally obliterated the zombies, he screamed in frustration, sweating from the tension. He had planned to process these monsters for recycling, but now they were reduced to useless ash. As Yi Qing stood there, distracted and dismayed, one of the zombies that had survived crept up behind him. The creature swung its dagger, aiming to strike him down. Sensing the hostile presence just in time, Yi Qing leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding the zombie's dagger strike. He stopped and turned to face his opponent, his expression serious. As the zombie charged at him with another attempt to stab, Yi Qing dodged again and quickly summoned his sword to prepare for battle. However, deflecting the attack made him painfully aware of his lackluster close combat skills. his attention was suddenly drawn to the side, where another zombie began to form. Realizing the threat, he urgently called upon his skill, desperate to prevent the monster from rising fully. The skill responded, absorbing the nearby body of the fallen team captain. Moments later, a golden shield materialized in Yi Qing's possession. Wasting no time, Yi Qing decided to put the shield to use. As the zombie drew closer, he swung the shield at the creature, combining the attack with his dagger. His efforts paid off when he managed to sever the zombie's head in one decisive move. Catching his breath, Yi Qing ran a short distance before stopping. He returned to the decapitated corpse and inspected it carefully. With a solemn tone, he apologized to the lifeless form, saying it was necessary to recycle it and let it rest in peace forever. Activating his skill once more, the zombie's body was processed. This time, the reward was a Dagger Master card. Excitedly, Yi Qing realized he had now gained the ability to wield a dagger with the precision of an assassin. Additionally, the system granted him invulnerability to piercing attacks, further boosting his combat capabilities. Yi Qing immediately used the Dagger Master card, his expression set with confident determination. As the new skill activated, he couldn't help but mutter that being a scavenger wasn't so bad after all. Without hesitation, he sprinted forward, diving headfirst into the battle against the horde of zombies. Yi Qing unleashed a series of powerful strikes, cutting down several zombies simultaneously. His refining skill processed the defeated monsters, and the system rewarded him with the trait Cruelty. Yi Qing obliterated yet another group of zombies, swiftly activating his skill to recycle their bodies. The interrogation officer grew more incredulous as he pieced together what his informant was describing. Staring in disbelief, he asked for clarification. Yi Qing approached the carnivorous plant, activating his skill while muttering to himself that all these people had been dragged into the abyss because of him. The scene shifted to the Abyss Observation Committee's interrogation room, where two stern men stood before a visibly trembling Lao Chen. The interrogator pressed on, stating that if they failed to recover the bodies of the falcon hunting party, their mission would be deemed a failure and no reward would be given. Lao Chen also told them about Yi Qing, who took all of his levels. But the interrogators made their skepticism clear, stating that the person he described, this so-called garbage man, did not exist. Adding to the strangeness, the staff pointed out that when Lao Chen was found, his level had inexplicably dropped to 1, something they had never encountered before. The two men observed him in silence for a while before finally speaking. They informed Shernan that his body exhibited alarmingly high levels of energy pollution, speculating that it might have resulted from being sucked into the abyss and subsequently spat out. This, they suggested, could also have caused hallucinations. The staff present voiced their suspicions, noting it was odd that Shernan, who held the role of the main assassin on his team, was the only one to survive. He insisted that he wasn't lying and pleaded with them to believe him. With a final burst of defiance, he exclaimed yet again that the man he described was, without a doubt, a garbage man. By the way, after his recent incident in the other abyss, Yi Qing sold magic crystals on the black market. However, he only received 30% of their total value, as the trade of such crystals was monopolized, making private transactions illegal. This illegality led to a steep 70% tax on black market deals. Coming back to present, near the entrance of the B-class abyss, Yi Qing, with his hood partially obscuring his face, stood among other armed warriors preparing to venture in. Momentarily distracted, Yi Qing glanced at his palm, recalling how he had used his refining ability in front of others. The possibility of someone reporting him to the supervisory committee lingered in his mind. Rolling up his sleeve, he examined the mysterious symbol on his palm, a mark tied to his awakening of a hidden profession. Aware of the dangers, he understood that discovery by the committee would likely lead to his imprisonment and extensive study. Determined to hide his abilities to make the most of his freedom, Yi Qing clenched his fist and resolved to earn money before circumstances closed in on him. Suddenly, a knight stepped forward and addressed the group, announcing that this abyss was newly formed and largely unexplored. He emphasized the dangers involved but added that the rewards would be doubled. He also called for high-level members capable of changing jobs to register with him. Yi Qing pointed to himself, questioning whether someone like him qualified. The knight, clearly unimpressed, asked for his rank. Yi Qing pulled back his hood and calmly stated he was a first-level scavenger. The revelation left the surrounding warriors stunned, their widened eyes and dropped jaws betraying their disbelief. After a brief silence, the knight laughed, approaching Yi Qing and grabbing his wrist. He mocked Yi Qing's audacity, certain someone so lowly didn't belong there. Sensing the assumptions about his weakness, Yi Qing decided to use them to his advantage. If others underestimated him, it would provide an opportunity to quietly recycle corpses during the mission. He resolved to stay at the back of the group, ensuring his actions went unnoticed. Before anything more could happen, Lu Xingran approached and ordered the knight to release Yi Qing, her commanding voice drawing everyone's attention. Recognizing her as the daughter of the renowned Lu family and a newly awakened professional chosen by the god, Lu Xingran firmly suggested adding Yi Qing to the team to meet their required numbers. However, the rest of the warriors were too captivated by her fame as the rising star of the hunting party, and the gods chose to pay immediate attention. While some hesitated, pointing out that Yi Qing was only at level 1 and likely inexperienced, she dismissed their concerns, emphasizing that most of the group was only there to fill in numbers. The knight, stepping aside to align himself with Yi Qing, agreed with her stance and noted that the team's main task was to protect Lu Xingran. He left the final decision to her. Meanwhile, Yi Qing, though nervous and sweating, felt a tinge of relief at narrowly avoiding rejection. His anxiety stemmed from a history of being dismissed as irrelevant in similar situations, making him expect the same outcome here. Before they entered the abyss portal, Lu Xingran suddenly paused and looked at Yi Qing with an intense expression. This unexpected gesture left Yi Qing frozen, overwhelmed by astonishment. As Lu Xingran's gaze lingered, Yi Qing frowned, trying to recall where he had seen that expression or demeanor before. Finally, Yi Qing recalled the moment from 2 years ago. His mind drifted to the image of Lu Xingran, frozen in horror, clutching a broken sword as she faced a monster. Without hesitation, Yi Qing stepped forward, wielding a simple stick as his weapon. He swung it with precision, striking the monster directly in its open mouth. The stick pierced through its upper jaw, delivering a fatal blow. As the creature collapsed, blood splattered across the ground. Yi Qing stood still for a moment, trembling as he stared at the fallen monster. Meanwhile, Lu Xingran looked at him in shock, questioning whether he was truly the garbage man she had assumed. She couldn't comprehend how he managed to defeat the creature. Ignoring her disbelief, Yi Qing closed his eyes, jumped with excitement, and raised his hands triumphantly. It was his first successful kill, and he eagerly announced that he had gained 1 experience point. After calming down slightly, he turned to Lu Xingran and asked if she was unharmed. She noticed he had gained just 1% of the experience required to level up. Though she had heard of such methods, she admitted she had never seen anyone actually leveling up this way. Tilting her head slightly, she wondered aloud if Yi Qing truly earned experience like this and questioned why he would choose such an unusual approach. Narrowing his eyes slightly, Yi Qing replied with mild annoyance that his actions were for money. He approached the fallen monster and picked up a magic crystal from the ground. Lu Xingran, shocked, exclaimed that she didn't believe him, insisting his methods were far too dangerous. Ignoring her initial protests, Yi Qing admired the crystal, briefly wishing he could claim all such resources for himself. Shaking off the thought, he turned to her with a sharp look and asked if she really thought it was risky. He remarked that she was fortunate with her profession but couldn't fathom the struggles others faced to survive. His tone turned disdainful as he took his backpack and evaluated her condition. Noting that she lacked a team, he questioned if she valued her life at all. He pointed out her reckless approach when facing demon beasts and asked what exactly she was trying to prove. Lu Xingran, frowning deeply, declared that she wanted to grow stronger. Her voice rose as she shouted her ambition, to be the first to conquer a specific place. Yi Qing, puzzled, asked for clarification, but she avoided his question, instead demanding to know why he truly wanted to change his profession. Standing up confidently, Yi Qing replied that it was for his family. With a faint smile, he pointed at himself and firmly stated his purpose, to protect his loved ones. Mirroring Yi Qing's expression, Lu Xingran asked what his name was. Relaxing into a smile, he introduced himself, and she responded with a brighter smile, introducing herself in turn. Confidently, she expressed her belief that Yi Qing would one day succeed in changing his profession. Extending her palm, she invited him to join her team once he accomplished that goal, suggesting they explore that place together. Yi Qing, taken aback by her sudden offer, hesitated before shaking her hand and agreeing to her proposal. However, he asked her not to stop him when the time came for him to make a change. Lu Xingran, looking at him with determination, told him to focus on changing his profession first. She noted that she already had 30 monsters under her control, while he only had one. Before they could continue, two figures rushed toward them. One of them called out to Lu Xingran, claiming they had been searching for her for a long time. Letting go of Yi Qing's hand, she turned to face the newcomers. The second person asked why she had run into the abyss. Then, both men noticed Yi Qing, calling him out with disdain, warning him not to approach Lu Xingran. The two men grabbed her by the arms and began dragging her toward the exit, telling her that their boss was furious and had nearly broken their necks in his attempt to find her. As they pulled her away, Lu Xingran desperately called out to them to wait. Yi Qing, narrowing his eyes in displeasure, watched them leave. Suddenly, Lu Xingran threw a magic crystal toward Yi Qing, warning him to catch it. Surprised, he managed to grab the crystal midair and stared at it in amazement. Still in shock, he clenched the crystal tightly in his fist. Lu Xingran smiled and shouted that this would be his first reward. Turning her back to him, Yi Qing held the crystal in his hand, ready to leave. In that moment, Yi Qing found himself wondering what Lu Xingran's name was. After a moment, he recalled it, though he asked her name with a questioning tone. The man nearby, hearing his guess, lightly tapped him on the back of the head, exclaiming that it was definitely Lu Xingran. Frowning, he then asked why Yi Qing was standing still, ordering him to move those crystals. Nervously, Yi Qing responded, saying he was already on his way. As he approached the portal, he glanced at Lu Xingran standing close by and quietly noted that he would do his best not to drag the others down. She froze as she noticed him, narrowing her eyes and studying him for a moment before speaking arrogantly. She remarked that it was excellent and told him to take the equipment, adding that they would be moving out soon. Once everyone was prepared, Lu Xingran commanded them to move forward. The rest of the team immediately agreed. Approaching the portal, Yi Qing's expression turned serious, and he thought about how this time, he would focus on earning money and returning alive. His determination caused his eyes to shine with a quiet intensity. Anticipating the activation of his skill, he reflected on his past experience in the abyss. Before leaving the abyss, Yi Qing had absorbed the body of the squad leader and mastered the golden shield. He also gained the dagger master skill by killing zombies and acquired the berserker ability. Additionally, he took the ability of the abyss boss. In the final moments before his exit, he destroyed a carnivorous plant by slicing through its core, causing blood to spray into the air. Landing on the ground, he received the super regeneration ability from the plant, allowing him to choose any profession without disadvantages. He distributed the extra points he gained evenly across 6 attributes: agility, will, intelligence, constitution, luck, and strength. He also realized that it was possible to exceed 100 points in any attribute, remembering that he had fully recycled everything in the previous abyss. As Yi Qing entered the new abyss through the portal, he narrowed his eyes and wondered what level would be equivalent to 100 points. Using his all-seeing eye and heightened perception, he scanned his teammates and was shocked to discover that one of the most imposing and strong-looking men only had 12 points in strength. He also noted that this man's intelligence was severely underdeveloped, with only 1 point invested in it. Distracted by the low intelligence stat, Yi Qing thought about how this man, despite his weaknesses, was still 12 times stronger than an average person, assuming an ordinary person's strength is around 1 point. With his own strength at 100 points, Yi Qing realized that he was 100 times stronger than an ordinary person. Yi Qing followed closely. Unbeknownst to him, his step caused a stone to shift, triggering a slab to shoot out of the wall and block his path. Startled, Yi Qing dodged to the side just in time. The rumble caught the team's attention, and they turned back to investigate. Assuming it was an earthquake, they asked what had happened. Laughing nervously, Yiqing discreetly reset the brick and claimed the underground structure was unstable. His explanation went unquestioned as a team member returned from scouting ahead, announcing the discovery of a chest. The group quickly gathered around the chest, perched on a platform embedded in a niche in the wall. As they examined it, Shernan frowned, then sighed in relief. However, the knight cursed under his breath upon realizing there were no dagger masters among them to handle the A-grade chest. A tense silence followed as the group exchanged uncertain glances. Breaking the stillness, Yiqing raised his hand, declaring he could attempt to open it. The others stared at him in surprise, their mouths slightly agape. Without waiting for approval, Yiqing approached the chest confidently. The group remained silent, their astonishment growing as they watched him make his move. After a moment, Yiqing opened the chest, and as the lid lifted, various item cards floated out, glowing faintly. Surprised by how easily the lock was picked, he inspected the items. Suddenly, as the glow faded and the cards settled, a knight approached, astonished, remarking that only a level 4 dagger master could unlock such chests. Yiqing casually replied that even level 1 scavengers could manage, as they often encountered locked chests while scavenging. Diverting the topic, the knight stored the cards and suggested dividing the loot after the mission. Gesturing forward, he urged the group to move on. The team turned toward the corridor. One of the girls agreed to proceed, stepping forward, but Yiqing froze and stopped her, suspecting danger ahead. Curious, she watched as he picked up a small stone and threw it down the corridor. The stone bounced off the walls, triggering concealed slabs that crashed together with a thunderous noise. The girl recoiled in fear, then glanced suspiciously at Yiqing, questioning if he was truly a level 1 scavenger. Laughing nervously, he insisted he was, attributing his skills to sheer luck. He explained that scavengers often encountered traps while collecting trash and that his past experiences with them had sharpened his instincts. He concluded by assuring her that his abilities were simply typical for a scavenger. Lu Xingran, standing behind Yiqing, froze momentarily, frowning as she processed his words. Suddenly, his system announced that the trap check was successfully completed. Now the group is believing him a little. The knight, taking out a card, handed it to Yiqing, calling it his personal reward and urging him to accept it gratefully. Examining the card, Yiqing noted it was a low-level broken mace suitable for level 1 use. While seemingly useless to the team, Yiqing didn't have time to dwell on it as they resumed their journey. Eventually, the group entered a vast hall. Spotting a glowing panel hovering above a bowl filled with blood, someone questioned its purpose. A few team members speculated it was a treasure marking the level's end and laughed at how easy it had been to reach this point. Convinced there were no monsters in the area, they moved closer to examine it. The floating stone panel displayed cryptic symbols, and the system declared it a reward room, devoid of threats. This signified they had entered a rare type of abyss. Despite the apparent safety, Lu Xingran frowned, cautioning the team not to celebrate prematurely. She instructed everyone to stay vigilant and prepare for potential monster ambushes. One of the men grabbed the stone tablet hanging above the bowl, excitedly declaring it the main treasure of the room. Waving it lightly, he called out to the team, suggesting they could leave now. Suddenly, the bloody liquid in the bowl began bubbling violently as the system announced the start of a blood test. The dark red liquid surged upward like a fountain, causing the team to freeze in alarm. Realizing this was no reward room but a trap, they cursed the man for triggering it. The liquid stopped spilling from the bowl, spreading across the ceiling instead. To their horror, it began forming into monstrous shapes. As the dark substance materialized into blood-red creatures, screams of fear echoed through the hall. Lu Xingran drew her weapon, frowning as she ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Following her command, the team stood back to back, weapons at the ready, as the bloody monsters encircled them, advancing from all directions. Yiqing, narrowing his eyes in thought, resolved to limit himself to 25% of his strength to avoid revealing his full capabilities. He retrieved the Ring of Weakness, often dismissed as useless trash, and slipped it onto his finger. The ring's ability allowed the wearer to reduce their stats by a chosen amount. Reflecting on his initial skepticism about the ring's value when he first obtained it, Yiqing now understood its utility. Frowning with determination, he silently noted that even seemingly worthless items could prove invaluable in the right circumstances. After lowering his stats, Yiqing assumed a fighting stance, ready for battle. Meanwhile, his teammates were already employing their magic and weapons to fend off the advancing monsters. Soon, Yiqing activated the spirit of trash, causing a faint glowing aura to surround him. As his comrades struggled against the creatures, Yiqing leaped into the air, swung his sword, and instantly dispersed the monster before him, clearing the area. Lu Xingran, noticing this, paused mid-fight and turned toward Yiqing, frowning in confusion. She asked if he had truly defeated the creature with a single strike. Observing him closely as he landed, she saw Yiqing standing still, seriously watching the remnants of the monster fall around him. Suddenly, a monster attempted to exploit Lu Xingran's momentary distraction, growling as it lunged at her from the side. For a moment, she continued to eye Yiqing, muttering that his abilities were intriguing. Irritated, she closed one eye briefly before sharply swinging her weapon, effortlessly slicing the attacking monster into countless pieces. Her expression remained neutral as the severed parts flew apart. One of the team members, observing this, frowned in disbelief. He cursed, questioning the absurdity of the situation. Shocked that a single blow could reduce monsters to shreds, he grew suspicious. Frustrated, he muttered that he wasn't faring nearly as well, casting a wary glance toward Yiqing before returning his focus to his own opponent. One of the monsters managed to latch onto a man's shield with a tentacle. He noticed the creature starting to change and shouted in alarm that these monsters were assuming human forms. The team observed closely and saw the shapeless mass transform into humanoid figures, complete with arms and legs. The bloody nightmare's natural state was unstable, and during combat, it imitated its enemy's behavior, becoming more dangerous in the process. Without waiting for the monster to attack, the man yelled and swung his sword, slicing off its head. A girl standing behind him praised his quick action, calling it impressive. Encouraged, the man grinned, but his confidence vanished when he noticed movement beside him. Despite being decapitated, the monster, unaffected by the loss of its head, leaped into the air, raising clouds of dust. It swung its weapon and struck the man with full force. Wide-eyed and horrified, he gasped, unable to process what had happened. Before he could react, the monster's blade severed his arm. Clenching his jaw to suppress a scream, he stumbled and fell as blood gushed from the gaping wound. His cries of pain filled the air as his team watched helplessly. The girl, horrified by the scene, questioned if these monsters were truly unkillable. Her voice trembled with desperation, but none of her comrades could offer an answer. The monster raised its sword again, aiming to finish off the man writhing in pain on the ground, too overwhelmed to notice the impending danger. With a roar, the creature swung its blade downward. The man widened his eyes in terror, bracing for the blow. However, before the sword could strike, it was engulfed in a brilliant glow. Lu Xingran leapt onto the monster from behind, activating her magic, which encased the creature in a thick layer of ice. Casting a disdainful look at her comrades, Lu Xingran called them helpless. Ignoring the fearful gaze of the man she had just saved, she pressed her hand firmly against the monster's head. Labeling it just a bloody nightmare, she criticized her team for being pathetic. Applying more pressure, the ice-encrusted monster shattered into countless pieces. With a contemptuous frown, she expressed shame for her comrades' incompetence, declaring them insignificant. Meanwhile, the remaining monsters continued to evolve, adopting even more humanoid forms. Nearby, a mage girl knelt beside the injured man to shield him. She raised her staff but cried out in desperation, admitting that the creature's speed left her no time to cast a spell. Before the monster could close in, Yiqing stepped forward, his expression resolute. Declaring that conventional weapons were useless, he decided to destroy the monsters outright. Raising his hands, he summoned fiery magical energy, channeling it into a powerful explosion. As flames erupted from his palms, Yiqing leaped into the air to aim more effectively. The firestorm collided with the advancing monsters, exploding on impact and spreading across the battlefield. Dust and debris filled the air as the sheer force of the attack created a fiery barrier, temporarily halting the creature's advance. The girl stared in disbelief, her mouth slightly open and her eyes wide. She stammered, asking if it was really Yi Qing who had unleashed the large explosion. Her astonishment stemmed from knowing it was a C-class spell, something that should have taken far longer to activate. The rest of the team shared her shock, murmuring among themselves and assuming it must have been some kind of mistake. After all, how could a first-level player achieve something like that? As the fire dissipated, only lingering dust hung in the air. Yi Qing stood silently, his lips pressed together and his fists clenched. Without acknowledging the bewildered stares of his comrades, he turned his focus to the monsters advancing toward him. They let out guttural roars, but instead of charging at them immediately, Yi Qing froze in place and released a loud, resonating scream. The sound waves rippled across the battlefield, stunning the monsters and causing them to falter momentarily. Taking advantage of their shock, Yi Qing's expression hardened. He clenched his fists tightly and activated his berserker state. As his body surged with power, his speed, strength, and damage output doubled. Without hesitation, he launched himself at the monsters, delivering a devastating blow. The impact sent the creatures flying apart, their grotesque forms splintering into countless pieces. However, Yi Qing's triumphant stance quickly shifted. His gaze darkened as he noticed something unusual. The blood particles from the destroyed monsters didn't settle on the ground. Instead, they hovered in the air, moving as if drawn by an invisible force. Slowly, the fragments began to converge, accumulating into a single, massive form. Yi Qing's eyes widened in shock as he realized what was happening. The parts of the monsters coalesced into an enormous creature, far larger than any of the previous enemies. The newly formed monster let out a deafening roar, its wide-open maw revealing an unnatural, menacing grin. The mage girl gasped, her expression filled with horror. "What's wrong with this monster?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. Yi Qing, his face slick with sweat, forced a nervous smile. "The monsters have fused into one," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. This isn't a normal enemy. This is a bloody nightmare at the king level." The team sensed something was wrong when Yi Qing, frowning, explained that the bloody nightmare could mimic its opponent, growing stronger in the process. Curious about what the king-level monster was imitating, Yi Qing prepared himself. Suddenly, the monster lunged at him, forcing him to dodge as its attack scorched the ground. Observing the immense power, Yi Qing realized the creature's strength far exceeded his own, and he crouched, analyzing its abilities with a worried expression. At that moment, Lu Xingran approached him, commanding him to step aside. Resolute, she slung her sword over her shoulder and promised to handle the monster. Yi Qing, confused but wide-eyed, watched as she gripped her weapon firmly and dashed to the side. The monster noticed her movement and raised its hand to strike, but Lu Xingran evaded the blow. As its fist slammed into the ground, she leaped onto its arm, scaling it with agility. Midair, she cast a spell on her blade and swung the sword at the monster. However, the creature blocked her strike with its tentacles, protecting its head. Undeterred, Lu Xingran pierced its body, partially freezing it with her magic. Yi Qing gasped in astonishment as he saw the monster immobilized. But the creature, roaring in rage, swung its other arm toward her. Realizing the danger, Lu Xingran dodged the attack, though the force caused her to lose her footing, forcing her to jump aside to avoid further harm. After regaining her stance, Lu Xingran glared at the monster, wiping her chin with a frown. She realized this fight was beyond her and mentally scolded herself for being too weak. Her thoughts drifted back to a time not long ago, when she had been sitting near the abyss portal. A guard had informed her that the abyss energy was unstable, asking if she was sure about entering alone. Determined, she bandaged her hand with her teeth and declared that her goal was to conquer the highest level of the ring tower. She sat in quiet resolve, frowning as she held her sword, reflecting on how far behind her elder siblings she still was. Rising to her feet, she gripped her weapon tightly, acknowledging that she couldn't even approach her family at her current level. Now, with magic activated, she braced herself for the monster's next attack. As she prepared to defend herself, she thought that if she couldn't even handle the abyss, she wasn't worthy of the Lu family name. Focused, her eyes widened with determination. She concentrated all her power, swinging her sword to create a magical dome around her, successfully blocking the monster's assault. The rest of the team watched in astonishment as Lu Xingran raised her hand, summoning a magical banner. With a focused expression, she waved her hand, causing the frost flag to pierce the ground, activating the magic. The effect of the banner boosted the speed of all allies within a 30-meter radius by 50%. Ice spread rapidly from the point where the flag's handle hit the ground, expanding quickly in front of Lu Xingran and trapping the monster in place. As the ice encased the creature, Lu Xingran's speed increased, and she took a firmer grip on her sword, preparing for the next move. She thought that even if the ice didn't kill the monster, it would at least hold it long enough for her to strike. With a frown, she charged forward, unleashing a powerful comet strike. Her sword cleaved the monster in two, and Yi Qing, observing from the sidelines, realized the strength of her C-class god-chosen abilities. He now wondered which was stronger, the bloody king-level nightmare or Lu Xingran's chosen power. However, shortly after, Lu Xingran's expression shifted to one of shock as she saw the monster's body reforming. Her strike had seemingly done nothing. The frozen section of the monster flew off, and the bloody substance inside returned to the main body. Stunned, Lu Xingran lowered her sword in defeat. Just as the monster extended its tentacles to strike her, she refused to give up. Leaping to dodge, she thought to herself that although her strength was that of a C-class, she was still no match for her more powerful siblings. Lu Xingran, though a member of the Lu family, felt like an outcast and often referred to herself as the weakest link. As she dodged the monster's tentacles midair, her mind was consumed with anger. She clenched her jaw, recalling the harsh words others had said about her. Her brother had once asked how she could be so weak, embarrassed by her abilities, while another family member had told her not to leave the house because the abyss was too dangerous for her. Enraged by these memories, she swore to grow stronger, even if it meant starting with an easier abyss. Swinging her sword with determination, she thought that as long as she continued to push herself, she could overcome any challenge and surpass everyone. With a fierce shout, she swung her weapon again, but as it struck the monster's bony head, the sword shattered into two pieces. Shocked, Lu Xingran stood frozen for a moment. Yi Qing, observing from the sidelines, frowned in confusion. Meanwhile, the monster seized the opportunity, launching a counterattack that sent Lu Xingran crashing into the wall. Screaming in pain, she spat out blood, her condition alarming the team. The female mage, seeing the severity of the situation, yelled that the bloody nightmare had killed Lu Xingran, urging the team to retreat. If a C-class warrior couldn't handle the monster, they were all in grave danger. As the monster raised its arm for another attack, Yi Qing's frown deepened. Determined to act, he rushed forward, leaping into the air and using his fire skill to explode one of the monster's arms. The severed limb flew to the side, narrowly missing the team. As the arm crashed to the ground, the team scrambled to avoid it, and Lu Xingran, landing on the severed part of the monster, turned her surprised gaze toward Yi Qing, focusing on him intently. As Yi Qing remained in the air, he activated his all-seeing eye, focusing intently on the monster to locate its weak point. He quickly understood that if this creature reached the king level, it could survive under almost any circumstances. Creating another fireball, he prepared for a powerful attack, mentally noting that a high-level monster like this could become immune to freezing, slowing, and even certain weak points as it leveled up. Realizing that there was no more time for restraint, Yi Qing decided to unleash his full power. The ring on his finger cracked, amplifying the fire energy near his hand. With determination, he aimed at the next section of the monster and unleashed a volley of fire. The monster screamed in agony, moving toward Yi Qing with the remaining half of its body. He frowned, weary, and leapt to the ground, sprinting away as the monster swung its other hand. Despite its body being severely damaged, it still struck with immense force. Yi Qing dodged by moving swiftly to the side, his speed impressing the female mage, who watched in silent admiration. Lu Xingran, meanwhile, drank a healing potion to restore her energy and continued observing Yi Qing closely. As Yi Qing gained his footing, he somersaulted in midair, moving behind the bloody nightmare. Landing gracefully, he quickly adjusted his stance, preparing for the next strike. He knew they would be able to win once he found the creature's weak spot. Clenching his fists, he activated his fire skill once more. A massive surge of flames erupted behind him, hurtling toward the monster. The ensuing explosion engulfed nearly the entire creature, and it screamed in agony as it was consumed by the intense fire. Yi Qing continued to frown, knowing that no matter which part of the monster he attacked, it would regenerate. He also noticed that he couldn't identify any weak points on the creature's body, as if it were being controlled remotely. Suddenly, a realization struck him. He stopped mid-thought, his eyes widening as he turned toward his team. Pointing at them, he drew their attention and shouted that the stone tablet, when removed, had revealed an image of a blood test. He deduced that the tablet had something to do with the bloody nightmare. Urging the team to kick the tablet to him, one of the men noticed the stone object beside him and kicked it toward Yi Qing, calling for him to catch it. The kick was powerful, and the stone flew through the air at high speed. As Yi Qing examined the inscriptions on the stone, a system notification popped up, indicating that he had passed an intelligence test and could now decipher the ancient writing. He realized that they needed to decode the ancient spell to break the blood curse. Frustrated, Yi Qing thought irritably that the solution had been right in front of him all along. If only he had known sooner, he would have used the all-seeing eye from the start. However, just as the stone was about to reach him, the monster extended its arm, grabbed the flying slab, and swallowed it whole. Immediately, the monster began activating its invincible mode, and a faint aura surrounded its body. The team noticed that the monster had stopped moving for a moment, and one of the members asked why it had frozen. Someone else remarked that it looked terrifying. Yi Qing squinted his eyes, cursing under his breath. Lu Xingran, watching him, looked on in confusion. Yi Qing frowned seriously, announcing that the monster had entered invincible mode. As he did, Lu Xingran approached him cautiously, asking if they had met before, as he seemed familiar to her. Yi Qing's eyes widened in surprise, and he asked if she didn't recognize him. He reminded her that they had met 2 years ago, and he was the garbage man who earned experience points. Lu Xingran froze, recalling the moment when Yi Qing had earned his first experience points by striking a monster. She then turned her attention back to him, exclaiming that she remembered now and asked if his name was Qing. Yi Qing smiled a little nervously, wiping sweat from his brow, and corrected her, saying the correct version of his name. Lu Xingran smiled back and admitted that she hadn't known he had already changed his profession, her enthusiasm apparent. Yi Qing crossed his arms over his chest, frowning decisively, and declared that he was now a level 1 garbage man. Lu Xingran's expression grew more serious as she thought about Yi Qing's journey. She realized he had risked his life repeatedly, accumulating points and growing stronger. She looked at him thoughtfully, but said nothing. Yi Qing, noticing her gaze, nervously scratched his cheek, wondering why she was looking at him like that. Lu Xingran continued evaluating him in her mind, quietly noting that, if she really thought about it, he might even be stronger than she was now. Lu Xingran smirked and said out loud that it still didn't sound cool. With a playful glint in her eye, she used ice magic to extend her sword, forming a sharpened point on its broken end. Yi Qing narrowed his eyes slightly but said nothing. Lu Xingran then stuck the ice-formed sword into the ground, raising small clouds of dust, and seriously announced that the tablet would circulate inside the bloody nightmare's body, but she could freeze it. This should stop the monster temporarily. She asked Yi Qing to use this time to find the tablet. Yi Qing smirked in agreement, noting that 1 head was good, but 2 heads were better. Lu Xingran looked at him in surprise as he clenched his fist confidently, offering her 0.5 points as her reward for agreeing to work together. He extended his clenched fist toward her, and she froze for a moment, surprised, before smiling and agreeing to the plan, but only if Yi Qing didn't get in her way. She also made a fist to hit his, sealing the agreement. Before they could proceed, the rest of the team spoke up, asking about their roles. Although they assumed they wouldn't be much help, they were still prepared to fight until the end. With a determined frown, Yiqing agreed, declaring that they would all fight together and definitely make it out alive. The rest of the team lined up beside Lu Xingran and Yiqing, all frowning determinedly, ready for the battle ahead. Before attacking, Yiqing assessed the situation, spotting the silhouette of a stone plate near the monster's belly. He looked at it more closely and then announced seriously that they had 5 seconds before the monster entered invincible mode. If they didn't act quickly, it would go berserk and begin a massacre for the next 30 seconds. Turning to the team, he shouted for them to listen and emphasized that those 30 seconds were crucial. Yiqing's voice rang out with confidence as he clenched his fists, declaring that they had to come back alive. The squad members froze in surprise, their expressions shifting before one of the men repeated Yiqing's words, raising his weapon high. "We must return alive," he cried, agreeing with the sentiment. The others echoed his declaration, and the group's morale surged. The atmosphere around them seemed to shift, with their collective will boosting their spirits. As a result, their weaknesses were reduced by 100%, and their speed and regeneration increased by 15%, the effects lasting for 30 seconds. Lu Xingran, feeling the improvement, looked at her body in surprise, frowning slightly. Then, with a determined expression, she turned around, catching the attention of the team. Together, they all shouted that they would return alive. Smiling confidently, Lu Xingran added that even a scavenger shouldn't be underestimated. She then held out her sword, drawing the attention of one of the soldiers. "Watch the monster's fury," she shouted, and the soldier immediately ran forward, raising his weapon as he charged toward the bloody nightmare. He stopped in front of the monster, calling it out with insults and obscene gestures, taunting it to focus on him. The monster, enraged, turned its attention to the soldier and roared, its long tentacles emerging from its body, flailing wildly. The soldier stood firm, continuing to provoke the beast. At the same time, Lu Xingran directed the mage. "Aim at the monster's newly grown claws, and cover the scavenger." The mage nodded, forming a ball of magical energy next to her staff. As the energy concentrated, smaller projectiles began to shoot out from the ball, striking the monster's body and causing it to roar in pain. Yiqing, noticing the chaos, warned the team. "The stone tablet is key to this trial, but if it's destroyed by the fireball, the trial will never end." The mage girl stopped, and Lu Xingran turned to him, her brow furrowed with concern. "What should we do then?" she asked warily. Yiqing, his palm raised, confidently declared that he thought he could defeat the monster with one hand. Lu Xingran frowned, clearly skeptical, and asked if he was serious. She assumed he was just trying to deceive her and asked if he really intended to dive into the monster's stomach to retrieve the stone tablet. She presented the item, now surrounded by a thick red liquid. Stretching out his hand, Yiqing activated his magical energy and admitted, with surprising honesty, that this was exactly what he wanted to do. Lu Xingran was taken aback by his decision, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned her attention to the archer, shouting for him to aim for the roof and create a ladder they could use to reach the monster's vital spot. The archer, pulling back the bowstring, agreed with determination and fired. The arrow collided with the ceiling, exploding on impact. Large stone slabs began falling, and the monster, surprised by the sudden attack from above, screamed in fury. Lu Xingran seized the opportunity, calling upon her frost magic to freeze the lower half of the monster's body. She instructed Yiqing to handle the rest. Yiqing, ready for the challenge, asked her to leave it to him and prepared to fight. Lu Xingran, running forward alongside him, mirrored his determination. The monster, sensing the incoming attack, extended its claws forward to block Yiqing's strike. But with swift precision, Yiqing changed the direction of his movement, dodging each of the tentacles and body parts flailing toward him. He destroyed the monster's limbs, sending stone fragments flying and creating clouds of dust in the air. As the fight continued, Yiqing carefully observed the monster's movements to avoid any surprise blows. Despite the occasional scratch or minor injury, he wasn't fazed. His regenerative ability kicked in almost immediately, healing the wounds before they could do any lasting damage. He realized that the real danger lay not in the minor cuts, but in how the monster's touch could still cause some harm. At that moment, Lu Xingran, having reached a safe distance from the monster, stopped and drove her frost flag into the ground. The frost quickly spread, encasing the lower half of the monster's body in ice shackles. The monster, realizing it had fallen into the trap, roared in fury. Seizing the opportunity, Yi Qing leapt into action. He heard someone from the team suggest aiming for the chest, which might be the monster's vulnerable point. Noticing the advice, he turned toward the speaker and then back at the monster. Clenching his jaw in irritation, Yi Qing realized he wasn't fast enough to act on the suggestion. Without hesitation, he activated his berserk state, boosting his speed by 20 points. The surge of power flooded his body, and he quickly took a potion that activated his poison resistance. The reverse effect of the potion increased his speed by an additional 15%, and his defense stats rose by 15% as well. Feeling his abilities sharpen, Yi Qing mentally noted that he could finally use the potion cards he'd picked up earlier, specifically the slow potion. With a shout of determination, he declared that this was his finest hour. His body blurred as he sped toward the monster, but the creature wasn't going down without a fight. Gathering its tentacles in front of it, the monster swung one of them toward Yi Qing with the intent to knock him aside. Realizing he couldn't dodge in time, Yi Qing cursed under his breath. The monster's strike hit him, sending him flying across the battlefield. Lu Xingran and the rest of the team gasped, their mouths slightly open in shock as they watched Yi Qing be thrown backward. The monster, freed from the ice shackles, roared, its fury building as it prepared for the next move. Yi Qing, spitting a few drops of blood from his mouth, smiled sadly, his eyes narrowing slightly. He repeated, "This is my finest hour," but there was a trace of resignation in his voice as he quietly admitted to himself that he had lost. With a sense of disappointment, he thought back to his earlier belief that everything could work out, but now it seemed like that hope had been misplaced. Despite this, he stubbornly clenched his jaw and declared aloud, "Everything will work out." Before he could land, his recycling ability activated, creating an energy pit beneath him. Yi Qing was about to fall into it when he announced, "The object to recycle is me," and smiled faintly. At that moment, a large number of hands emerged from the shadow space, reaching out to grab him. The monster froze, eyeing the unexpected development with confusion. The rest of the team was equally shocked, with Lu Xingran frowning and cursing under her breath. "What is this?" she asked, sweat covering her face from the sudden fear. The rest of the team, too, was frightened and bewildered, asking where the hands had come from. Just then, the system's voice rang out, stating that it was impossible to recycle a living organism, and the operation was cancelled. Yi Qing, however, frowned with determination. Turning to his skill, he muttered that if he couldn't be used for recycling, then the system should throw him vigorously. One of the larger hands grabbed his body, swinging him through the air. Grinning despite the situation, Yi Qing shouted for the skill to use its full strength. The hand holding him threw him aside with such force that he flew straight toward the bloody nightmare. The monster froze, staring in amazement as Yi Qing flew through the air, barely slowing down. Without missing a beat, Yi Qing thrust his hand into the creature's body, grabbing the stone tablet he so desperately needed. Yi Qing shouted triumphantly, "I have the tablet," as he landed smoothly on the ground. The monster, with a hole now pierced through its body, crashed to the ground, sending clouds of dust into the air. However, Yi Qing paid no attention to the fallen creature and, instead, focused intently on the stone tablet in his hands. As he read the inscriptions on it, the system's voice echoed, announcing that he had passed the test of blood. In the next moment, the monster's body began to disintegrate, turning into a brilliant light that dissolved into the surrounding space. The entire team froze, stunned and confused. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they watched the monster vanish. Lu Xingran, unable to contain her emotions, exclaimed in amazement, "Did we really win?" Gradually, the realization dawned on everyone. Smiles spread across their faces, and they began jumping for joy, celebrating their success. The task had been completed, and with it came rewards. Their levels increased, and several team members saw improvements in their stats. Lu Xingran, looking at her own body in shock as a bright light enveloped her, gasped, "Did I really level up?" Her stats had increased significantly, strength by 33 points, agility by 28 points, intelligence by 38 points, will by 26 points, constitution by 21 points, and luck by 34 points. Yet, amidst the celebrations, it was clear that Yi Qing had not leveled up. The system had flagged an error during his leveling process because he had already reached the maximum level, leaving him unaffected by the bonuses the others received. Yi Qing closed his eyes, scratched his head, and chuckled, agreeing with the situation. Suddenly, a glowing chest appeared where the monster had dissolved, and one of his teammates excitedly shouted that it must be a reward. As the chest opened, numerous equipment cards flew into the air. Yi Qing caught one, examining the sword card. It increased his damage by 88 points but required level 10 to use. With a frown, he realized his level was only 1, and the system confirmed the weapon was unusable at his current level. Feeling frustrated and on the verge of tears, Yi Qing tossed the card aside and looked at the other shining cards scattered on the ground. They were all rewards, yet useless to him. He longed to use them, but his level prevented it. Just then, Lu Xingran approached with a confident frown and stated that since Yi Qing had defeated the bloody nightmare, it was up to him to decide how the rewards would be distributed. Yi Qing awkwardly tugged at his hair, feeling embarrassed. He closed his eyes and admitted his discomfort, but soon became more serious. Stepping closer, he whispered into her ear, revealing that he had something important to say. Surprised by his request, Lu Xingran tilted her head but didn't argue. A group of men gathered near the portal entrance, with their leader holding a walkie-talkie. He ordered his team to contact headquarters and prepare a rescue mission. However, as Lu Xingran and her team emerged from the portal, they quickly shouted that no rescue was needed. The men stared nervously as Lu Xingran and her team appeared. Lu Xingran walked forward confidently, followed by the others. The leader, visibly relieved, turned to her, and a reporter observing the scene noted that this was typical of Lu Xingran's family. They had already handled everything. The leader, still tearful, rushed to her, overjoyed to see she was unharmed. Lu Xingran calmly pushed him aside, closed her eyes, and declared that everything was in order. With one hand holding the man back, she waved farewell to her team. They, deciding to keep this moment private, silently bid her farewell. Lu Xingran gave a slight smile, affirming that she could handle anything as her class was S. So, she took all the credits because earlier Yi Qing and Lu Xingran had a talk together. He actually wanted to sell his part of the stuff they got as rewards, and her family isn't short on money Sue. And he also told her to take the credits of clearing this abyss and treat him as if he was not here, he'll just slip out secretly later on. So yeah, he was still inside. The floor was empty as Yi Qing lowered himself, placing a stone slab in front of him. He observed it closely before extending his hand toward it, noticing a small crack where a red substance, similar to that of the monster, appeared. The small monster shuddered at the sight of Yi Qing's hand, faintly glowing from his skill. He realized that even a creature as pitiful as this monster wouldn't want to be treated like trash, trampled on by others. Pulling his hand back and leaning closer to the monster, he asked if that was the case. Offering it a chance to become his power, he extended his hand forward, using his skill to absorb the creature. Soon, the bloody nightmare was successfully refined, granting him the nightmare body ability. This ability used life essence to summon a nightmare clone that could imitate its host and deal damage. The clone would appear immediately after activation, and the ability could be upgraded. The system notified him of a 30-second cooldown for the skill. Yi Qing stood up, excitedly clenching his fists and activating the skill card. As the magical energy surrounded him, he waited for the power of the bloody nightmare to solidify in his body. When the energy dissipated, he frowned, eager to test the ability. In a bustling city establishment, Yi Qing sat with a drink at his side, engrossed in the system window before him. He reviewed the item cards he had obtained, his expression turning sour as he noted his earlier decision to give all high-level equipment to Lao Chen. Reflecting further, he realized a scavenger laden with impressive gear would surely attract attention from observers. On the other hand, scavengers were typically so inconspicuous that no one would notice if he began selling such weapons discreetly. Leaning back in his chair, eyes closed, he toyed with the thought but dismissed it, reasoning that no one would willingly buy items from a scavenger anyway. He grasped the glass again, only to accidentally tap the recycling icon. The system promptly announced that the equipment had been recycled, awarding him 1 standard point in return. Stunned, Yiqing stared at the notification, mouth agape, as he questioned whether he had truly recycled a valuable weapon. The system's response clarified the function, explaining that recycling was intended for disposing of sorted trash. After the system explained the recycling process, classifying, crushing, smelting, and separating equipment into reusable materials, Yiqing learned that standard points were a universal currency earned by decomposing unusable items. These points could be used for upgrading, repairing, or crafting new gear. Surprised by this revelation, he pulled out several unused item cards, marveling at their potential. The system, continuing its tutorial, prompted him to repair a normal dagger. Examining its stats, he saw its durability was completely depleted at 0/33, nearly tossing it aside. However, the tutorial warned him that recycling the dagger would yield 5 points. Scrolling through the system menu, Yiqing calculated he needed 4 additional points to reach the required total, which meant recycling more items. He successfully recycled a broken weapon, a greatsword, a loose wooden shield, and a curved broad-bladed knife, earning 1 point per item. With enough points accrued, he repaired the dagger. As the blade began to glow, he froze in shock, noticing not only was the weapon restored, but its durability and damage stats had slightly improved. The dagger now had a durability of 34/34, an increase from its previous maximum, and its damage rose from 21 to 22. This unexpected improvement made Yiqing realize that even seemingly worthless weapons could become stronger through wear, repair, and enhancement. It was a game-changing discovery that hinted at the hidden potential of continuously maintaining equipment. Yiqing grinned, remarking that even useless equipment deserved improvement. The system then congratulated him for completing the training, offering 2 reward options: a recipe for a magic potion that could instantly restore mana and strength, or a boost of 2 random attributes. Moments later, a glowing card for the magic potion recipe appeared. Examining it closely, Yiqing placed a thoughtful hand on his chin. Attribute points weren't a priority for him now, but he recalled how unprepared adventurers often ran out of mana in the abyss before reaching a boss's lair, forcing them to retreat. He envisioned weary warriors trudging through dungeons and acknowledged the immense value of mana-restoring potions, often the key to a party's survival. This solidified his decision to choose the potion recipe. The system congratulated him again, this time for learning to restore items, prompting a smirk from Yiqing. However, he scratched his cheek in surprise as the system explained that crafting a magic potion required 6 points and a container. The need for a container intrigued him. While he expected points would be necessary for potion making, he couldn't help but question the role of the container, narrowing his eyes in contemplation. After silently mulling over the details, he raised his hand, signaling the cook in the kitchen. Yiqing apologized and waited for the man to acknowledge him before asking for a container. Shortly after, the necessary items were prepared, and several empty glasses were placed before him. Examining them intently, he reflected on how the recycling process was complete and noted that the next phase, regeneration, was now underway. As a silhouette of a container filled with liquid appeared on the system's display, Yiqing pondered its significance, guessing it might be mana. He then diligently followed the steps to create a magic potion, his actions occasionally accompanied by excited exclamations that caught the cook's attention from the kitchen. After some time, Yiqing stopped, exhausted but satisfied, as 5 glasses of potions sat before him. Picking up one, he scrutinized it, commenting that while the potion appeared strange, it seemed functional. Lifting it to his lips, he took a sip, only to gag at its putrid taste, which resembled rotten eggs. Despite his displeasure, a radiant aura suddenly enveloped him as the system announced boosts to his mana, strength, and endurance. The effects were immediate. His physical weakness vanished, and he could feel his energy returning. Pleased with the results, Yi Qing left the establishment, storing the remaining potions. Pulling one out as he walked, he resolved to venture into the abyss again. As Yi Qing stepped outside, a man called out to him, asking if it was really him. The man's partner, standing nearby, smirked as Yi Qing froze, cautiously observing the situation. Another individual in a sharp suit approached, positioning himself to block Yi Qing's escape. The first man chuckled, remarking how Yi Qing's demeanor had noticeably changed in just a few days. Remaining silent, Yi Qing warily watched as the man stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. With a smirk, the man frowned, questioning if Yi Qing had failed to find the crystals while rummaging through the trash. Yi Qing's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as the man added that he had been searching for him for some time and had even considered reporting him missing. Shaking off the man's hand, Yi Qing firmly stated that he had paid off all his debts and demanded to be left alone. However, the man wasn't deterred. Throwing an arm around Yi Qing's shoulders, he sneered, asking if Yi Qing truly believed he was free. He explained that while the debts might be settled, Yi Qing's contract was still binding. With an exasperated sigh, the man warned Yi Qing not to forget his place, taunting him by saying he was nothing more than a garbage collector. His final words cut deep as he declared that Yi Qing would live and die as a garbage man, leaving no room for argument. The man sneered at Yi Qing, warning him not to overdo it and accusing him of pretending to be something he wasn't. With a sharp motion, he slapped the magic potion glass from Yi Qing's hand, causing the liquid to spill onto the ground. Placing his hand on Yi Qing's, the man mockingly asked if he was so weak that he couldn't even hold onto a glass properly. He laughed loudly, taunting Yi Qing for showing off and asking if he had any idea how things would end. Yi Qing remained silent despite the provocations, his calm demeanor contrasting with the tension in the air. The other two men nearby flexed their fists, with one smirking and admitting his disgust toward Yi Qing. When another voice spoke from behind him, Yi Qing frowned but refrained from turning around, instead glancing toward a nearby surveillance camera. He understood the rules well. Using abilities outside the abyss was strictly forbidden unless authorized by law enforcement or special personnel. Tightening his lips, he realized he needed to find a blind spot in the camera's view if he were to use his recycling and regeneration skills. The man's taunts escalated as he suggested Yi Qing should eat the spilled potion pearls one by one and even lick the ground clean. Smiling broadly, he mockingly offered to help Yi Qing gather the spilled contents, claiming they should assist their little brothers. His laughter filled the air as Yi Qing clenched his fists, staring intently at the overturned glass and the scattered potion. Finally, Yi Qing raised his gaze, his expression serious. He announced that he would agree to the man's terms but added a bold condition. He would only do so after the man kissed his ass. The man's face twisted with anger, and he clenched his fist, ready to strike Yi Qing. However, his actions halted abruptly when another person approached. Trembling and stuttering, he asked in disbelief, "Is that Rodrigo Caesar?" Rodrigo Caesar, a member of the C-class hunting group known as Blood Oath, frowned sternly as he leaned closer to the man. Grabbing him by the tie and pulling him forward, Caesar demanded to know if they had gathered enough people. The man, now drenched in sweat, stammered nervously, explaining that they were just one person short of their required number. Caesar's frown deepened, and his seriousness was palpable, the veins on his face becoming visible with his rising tension. Without warning, he turned toward Yi Qing and called out to him, his voice carrying authority. Before Yi Qing could respond, Caesar declared that he was hired. The man, visibly stunned, protested, calling Yi Qing a garbage man and stuttering in disbelief. His face, glistening with sweat, betrayed his nervousness as he tried to argue. Yi Qing remained frozen, staring at Caesar in amazement, unsure how to react to the sudden turn of events. Desperately, the man smiled nervously, closing his eyes as he rambled about finding someone more capable. He raised his finger, offering to search immediately. But Caesar interrupted, asserting that under the red moon in the abyss, the monsters would be exceedingly ferocious. His tone left no room for argument, emphasizing the gravity of the situation. Yi Qing felt detached from the idea of strength, believing it was all irrelevant. As he heard the conversation, his mind briefly fixed on the phrase about the red moon. He recalled that during these times, monsters would go wild, and rare creatures would appear in the abyss. Defeating these monsters would yield doubled rewards and higher quality magic crystals. Imagining the unusually red moon and the abyss portal glowing the same hue, along with the large quantity of crystals, Yiqing mulled over it. After a brief pause, with a determined expression, he agreed and asked Caesar to add him to the necessary list. Caesar, pleased by this decision, called Yiqing clever, while his assistant, standing nearby, remained frozen in shock at the turn of events. Caesar gestured for him to approach, and soon after, Lao Chen stepped forward. Yiqing was startled by a voice behind him, and when he turned, he saw Lao Chen, his face drenched in sweat, recognizing Yiqing and nervously repeating that it was him. With a frown, Yiqing snapped at him to be quiet, his frustration growing. He quickly approached Lao Chen, placing his hand on his face, before swiftly pulling him away and hiding around the corner of a nearby building. Lao Chen was ordered to be quiet. Yiqing positioned himself so that Lao Chen was pressed against the wall, running a hand over his chin, his face serious. Lao Chen was shocked and confirmed it was truly him. Yiqing remarked that if he hadn't used their powers, they'd all be dead, and it was only thanks to him that Lao Chen had survived. Caesar, peering from around the corner, looked at them with surprise and asked if they knew each other. Yiqing nervously chuckled, denying their acquaintance, though beads of sweat formed on his face. Caesar, accepting his response, dismissed them and turned away, muttering that it was hard to believe someone who killed his team could have friends. As Caesar walked off, Yiqing sighed in relief, while Lao Chen, trembling, barely held back his tears. After Caesar had walked far enough, Yiqing turned to Lao Chen with a serious expression and asked how he'd escaped. Lao Chen explained that the committee had initially tried to sentence him to 15 years in prison, but he had managed to have all charges dropped by paying a $1.5 million fine. He shouted that because of Yiqing, he was now bankrupt and had lost all his levels, meaning he had to start over from scratch. Lao Chen warned Yiqing that he would report him to the committee if he wasn't compensated, but Yiqing, releasing a hint of his magic and surrounding himself with an intimidating aura, glared at him and seriously threatened that if Lao Chen spoke again, he would be treated like trash. Later, in the Sea City subway with a portal leading to the abyss, Yiqing, Lu Xingran, and Caesar approached a group of people standing near the portal. Zhou Tong, a level 3 bard, greeted Yiqing, inviting him to join cannon fodder and asked about his profession. Yiqing remained serious, introducing himself as a level 1 scavenger. Lao Chen also mentioned his level 1 mage status. Tong placed his hand on Yiqing's shoulder, closing his eyes and reassuring him that everything was fine, since only a group of low-level individuals had gathered, so no one would mock him. He added that they had all exchanged their lives for money, which he claimed was the most humiliating thing. Yiqing, slightly displeased, thought that fitting in with this group seemed impossible. Meanwhile, Tong, still smiling, turned to the others to introduce the rest of the group. He announced that their team needed a leader and, as a level 3 bard, he was nominating himself. Lao Zhu, a level 2 healer, agreed, noting Tong's higher level, while Lao Zhang, a level 3 warrior, expressed no objections. Suddenly, Caesar grabbed the attention of Yiqing and the others, announcing that in addition to the 6 core members of the Blood Oath group, they would be joined by 5 temporary members. One of the warriors behind Caesar crossed his arms and cursed, mocking the term cannon fodder. Another team member clarified that cannon fodder were only used as bait, unlike them who had changed their jobs. Ignoring his team's frustration, Caesar, surrounded by a magical aura, explained that the abyss was shaped like a labyrinth with many traps in each room. He told them that cannon fodder's mission was to find the passage to the boss room quickly and relay that information to the main team. Pressing the key to the abyss portal, he admitted that he didn't have high expectations for their fighting skills and warned them to flee if they encountered any monsters. As the key activated the portal, a light spread, opening the abyss. Caesar extended his hand toward it and said that if they wanted the money, at least one of them had to survive, and the sole survivor would claim all the earnings. Meanwhile, Zhang, distracted by Caesar's speech, noticed Zhu preparing to enter the portal. Frowning, Zhang called out to him, asking why he was coughing. Zhu explained that he couldn't back out since he had 4 daughters to feed. Sighing, Zhang shared that his wife was dying, and that was why he had to take this dangerous risk. They all decided to move forward and approach the entrance of the abyss, with Yi Qing leading the way. Zhang suddenly turned to Zhu, drawing attention to the new member of their team. Zhu agreed, stating that someone always died in a cannon fodder squad, with someone else inevitably taking their place. Zhang clarified that he was talking about Yi Qing, who was walking ahead completely relaxed. Yi Qing was indeed calm, hands in his pockets, with a determined frown. Zhang admitted that it was the first time he had seen someone walk toward their death so composed. Finally, they entered the abyss, and after descending a few steps, Tong glanced back at his comrades and smiled, asking if it was strange that they hadn't encountered any monsters yet. Zhu, moving closer, sighed as he noticed his breath turning into steam. He commented that it had suddenly become very cold. Zhang agreed, noticing the temperature drop as well. Tong, shivering, closed his eyes and muttered that he knew he should have dressed warmer. Crossing his arms over his chest, he hoped to somehow warm himself up. Tong suggested they just keep moving forward, but no one responded to his comment about the cold. They all silently followed him deeper into the abyss. Suddenly, Tong stepped on a rock that gave way under his foot, triggering a trap that sent a massive blade falling from above. Tong, unaware, stood there nervously smiling, while Yi Qing shuddered in fear upon seeing the axe. Reacting quickly, Yi Qing threw a stone at Tong, and only then did Tong realize the danger. Once he was at a safe distance, he stared at the blade embedded in the ground and awkwardly ran a hand through his hair, asking what had happened. Yi Qing, calling him an idiot, irritably declared that he had triggered a trap. Lao Chen, giving Tong a wry look, wondered how he had even survived this long. Tong closed his eyes, muttering that he had been lucky, and lamented how close he came to dying. Yi Qing glared at him, his jaw clenched, exclaiming that Tong was being too careless. Ignoring the outrage from his teammates, Tong simply ran ahead, suggesting they move on. Once again he stepped on another trap, causing webs to fall around him. Tong, sweating from the effort, frowned and screamed as he jumped to the side, frantically waving his arms. The cocoons fell to the ground, and Zhu, eyeing the scene, skeptically asked if the creatures were alive. Before anyone could respond, one of the cocoons was torn apart by sharp thorns, and level 5 demon spiders crawled out of the fallen cocoons. The monsters advanced, opening their mouths wide, revealing sharp fangs as they prepared to attack. The spiders, elite monsters and demonic insects capable of spitting poison, advanced toward the group. Tong, spotting the danger, screamed in horror, admitting his intense dislike for spiders. He raised his hands defensively but didn't flee. Lao Chen, frowning, quickly activated fire magic, launching several small fire projectiles at the spiders, but they barely caused any damage. One of the team members shouted in frustration that these were elite monsters, and Lao Chen cursed under his breath. Suddenly, Zhang, sword at the ready, charged forward, asking his comrades to let him handle the fight. He swung his sword at the monsters, but one spider, running past him, lunged toward Yi Qing, choosing him as its target. The spider grabbed Yi Qing's leg with its jaws, but the damage was minimal. Calmly, Yi Qing stood with his hands in his pockets, hardly paying attention to the battle. With a swift kick, he sent the spider flying into pieces, its insides splattering in the air. Lao Chen, briefly distracted, frowned at Yi Qing and asked why he was acting so arrogantly. Yi Qing, eyes closed and irritated, shouted that all of this was disgusting. Lao Chen was surprised, knowing that Yi Qing was simply collecting the spider's remains. As Yi Qing noticed the system notification stating that a raw material for processing had been found, specifically, the spider's body, he decided to start the process. The remains of the spider were enveloped in the aura of his skill, and the processing began. Thanks to this, Yi Qing earned 1 attribute point and received an arcane called Tempering Poison. This ability granted that when a weapon hit a target, it would poison the enemy, dealing 60% of the weapon's damage for a few seconds. If the attack was a critical hit, the damage increased to 120%. The requirement for this skill was a dexterity of at least 25, and the item card specified that it was a blade-type skill, mutually exclusive with the vampire type. As Yi Qing examined the item information, the system explained that Arcana was an additional ability type that could be applied to items and equipment. After using it, the Arcana would disappear, and the item would retain the Arcana's buff until it was destroyed. Arcana of the same type couldn't overlap, but multiple Arcana could be fused. Yi Qing speculated that through recycling corpses, he could not only obtain skill cards but also Arcana. He imagined fusing two cards, a blade type and the Arcana he had just acquired, into a new, enhanced card. He realized Arcana could buff equipment. His thoughts were interrupted when Zhang, noticing Yi Qing was distracted, ordered him to stop daydreaming. Sweat beaded on Zhang's face from the battle's effort, but he ignored it, staying focused on fighting off the spiders. Zhang warned Yi Qing to retreat if he couldn't help. Irritated, Yi Qing snapped that he was coming and pulled out his weapon. He decided to test the quenching poison on a regular blade. When he fused the two cards, a magical aura enveloped his blade, changing its appearance. Meanwhile, Tong running from the spider chasing him. Tong, frustrated, pulled a mask from his pocket, muttering about being the highest level but not admitting he couldn't handle this alone, but he can buff his teammate and nerf the enemies. As the spider lunged, Tong barely dodged, struggling to regain balance. Realizing the danger, he understood what he had to do. He pulled out a microphone, raised it in one hand, and pressed his other palm to his face, summoning a fiery aura around him. He began to sing, activating his skill. Yi Qing, frowning, stared at him in shock, wondering what Tong was doing. Tong's chanting made the spider grow stronger instead of weakening. The monster roared and charged again, its body transforming into a more powerful form. Tong, horrified by the consequences, started to flee, screaming in panic about how the spider had become stronger.